We are live. It is Sunday, June 7th, 2020. And 25 minutes ago, my good friends, I put up a poll on Twitter to see if people could guess who our mystery guest today was going to be. Coming in first place in the poll with 47.9% was Bill Kristol. By the way, 512 people at least have voted in this, so it's a good sample size for 25 minutes. Coming in second with 35.9% of the vote was Anne Applebaum, but neither Bill Kristol nor Anne Applebaum is our mystery guest today, I'm afraid.
I voted for Anne, but that was not because I wanted it to be Anne. I was actually hoping it would be Jonathan, but I was trying to I was like, Jonathan's already been on the show.
Anne is promising, Anne will be on the show. I'm sure Bill Kristol will be on the show, but they are not our mystery guest today. Coming in third with 13.3% of the vote, New York Times columnist Catherine Rampell, who has also agreed in principle to be on in lieu of fun. But my friends, Catherine Rampell is not our mystery guest today. And coming in dead last with 2.9% of the vote is our actual mystery guest, Jonathan Rauch. Hello, Jonathan.
Hello. How should I react to that?
I think with great pride.
I like your headset, Jonathan.
Thanks. Were these votes predictions or preferences?
They were predictions.
They were predictions. It was a predictive poll, though I'm not sure how you should interpret it. Maybe people are very sophisticated in lieu of fun viewers, and they, like Kate, knew you had already been on, and they assumed we weren't in the double booking business. But on the other hand, maybe they were like, no, we don't want that Rauch guy. So Kate, it's your monologue day. Go for it.
Okay. So my monologue today it's interesting because I was thinking about this and I was like, why did we start monologues? I was like, did he bring Virginia Heffernan on just to like teach me how to do a monologue because he knows how bad I am at monologuing or giving speeches or doing anything? I'm fine with like presentations at this point that are 15 to 20 minutes long, but I'm really bad at monologuing. I prefer Q&A to almost any format. All of the pressure is off of me. I can either say, I don't know when people ask me a question, or I give an answer that I know that I can stand behind. But that being said, I thought today, I was like, okay, I'm going to take the bait. I'm going to try to do a good job with the monologue. Even though like in principle, we don't think about it in lieu of fun, except when we're on the show. And like today I put out this tweet that was kind of reflecting on the fact that there are all of these scientists that have now called on Facebook to do this different content moderation policy for Trump's tweets. And that there have been just like, we've just talked about content moderation constantly. And sometimes it really hits me that it has only been 4 years since I was literally my paper on content moderation that went on to be published in the Harvard Law Review was failed for my program at Yale Law School because it was not sufficiently legal and not sufficiently doctrinal. And this isn't actually a topic for legal scholarship, Kate. Go find another topic. I will say Jack Balkin was a lone voice of reason in that conversation. But I made a joke about it.
I have so many questions about this story.
Yeah, so I made a joke about it, about how basically like 4 years ago, it's like, I want to do this thing. And everyone was like, well, not everyone, I would say like 80% of like the people that were involved and had power over me as administrators, as I was a PhD student, were like, this is a terrible idea. Literally failed it. You don't fail anything at Yale. I went and rewrote like a whole 10-page memo about how I was going to change the paper, turned it in, got a pass grade, threw out the memo, did what I wanted, and wrote the paper. But like, there was this, like, there is this kind of like, there has been this meteoric rise of this topic. And it's so easy to look back now and be like, oh, you got so lucky, you picked the right topic or you did whatever. And like missing from that fun little tweet that I said was like all of the times that I literally cried in my shower and like my like partner had to like drag me out of like off the bathroom floor and be like, you have to finish this. You're not stupid. You didn't do a bad job. Keep going. Like the only way to prove these people wrong is to like keep going. And like, it's all very glib and very like, oh, it looks so great. Like she picked the right thing, but it was damn hard. And there's no way I would know if I was doing that, if I did it over again, that I was making the right choice in picking this topic. And that's happened probably to all of us a number of times, and we kind of don't realize it and think back and like look at the moment that we had that was like, oh, I made this choice. And so really looking back, going way past the dissertation, I'm going to talk about when I was 16 years old and I had a live journal account and I was regularly live journaling my feelings as a 16-year-old girl, which questionable choice. But this was the I think I was this was like 1996 and I was, or 1998. And I was basically journaling all of this stuff. And it got discovered by the faculty at my high school and my chemistry teacher, Mrs. Houlihan, who I will never forget this woman. She hated me anyway. But she just was like, I just want to talk to you. She pulled me aside. She's like, I'm so embarrassed for you. I'm just so embarrassed for you that you're just publishing your feelings and your thoughts like online. Like this is just, I can't tell you like how bad this is going to be for you in the long run. And I was like, I hate you. Like that's terrible advice. You just don't get it, lady. You're part of the past. And like, I have literally waited my whole life to be like, someday bump into Mrs. Houlihan and be like, hey, no, now I like actually am an actual law professor teaching internet to people who made the same mistake that I did, like back in like 1998.
And what would you say if you like had Mrs. Houlihan on in lieu of fun? Because maybe we should arrange that as a kind of Kate Quantum, this is your life kind of thing. But like, we could rapture her into the conversation. But like, what would you say to Mrs. Houlihan?
I don't know, but like,
would you say you were wrong, lady? You're part of the past.
No, I mean, maybe, and then maybe be like, that was one of the most horrible. Like that was so. I felt awful. I felt so much shame and like deep embarrassment for being me, for like having feelings, for being like, you know, I don't think that I was out on the like as like, you know, liking women on like on those live journals, but it was certainly like very emotional and very engaged. And I was like, what a terrible, it was just like, it was so crushing. And I think that the weird thing is I think that she meant well. I think that she kind of meant well. And I look back on it and I'm like, she was trying to do me some type of service. But anyways, my monologue has gone very long, but
Mrs. Houlihan, if you're watching,
I feel bad for using her real name, but it's like a ubiquitous enough name.
Yeah. Jonathan Rauch, who is the Mrs. Houlihan in your life?
I'm thinking of Jimmy Durante and what he would be saying right now. He said, "Good night, Mrs. Houlihan, wherever you are." The reference may be lost on Kate, but I
get it. No, it's great.
My Mrs. Houlihan was Mrs. Levin. She was one of my 8th grade English teacher. And she, unlike Mrs. Houlihan, was not a monster of any kind. But I thought her class was really boring. And I was kind of a 13-year-old snot. And I went to her and said, your class is really boring. I'm not really learning anything. I want to do independent study. My idea is I'm going to read books and write book reports, which I thought was a splendid idea. And Mrs. Levin, who understood me to be a bit of a brat, took the attitude, well, be careful what you wish for. So I did that. I think the first book it might have been Gulliver's Travels, I'm not sure, or it might have been Tale of Two Cities. Anyway, it was something like that. actually, I think it was Huckleberry Finn. And I wrote a book report, and she was not happy about having to do the extra work. For whatever reason, she returned that book report with a flood of red ink. I mean, she slashed it, she burned it. It looked like a battlefield of the Somme at the end of the day. And I will tell you, she was really mean about all of this. And I learned more from doing that series of book reports. By like the fourth, they were coming back pretty clean. Now, I suspect this was more having to do with giving me a kick in the pants than any sympathetic exercise in mentoring, but it was good for me.
Well,
I will always be grateful to her.
That's actually kind of a nice story.
Yeah, that's amazing.
That one kind of took a direction I didn't expect.
Yeah.
It is, but it's not consonant with the self-esteem school of teaching.
Right.
I would say that, like, Ben, did you have a Mrs. Houlihan? I mean, I also just want to say that, like, I've said this before, the town I grew up in was very conservative. I also like had a spaghetti stripe. I'll never forget this, a spaghetti strap tank top on, like one day, like, and this was in 10th grade. And like, it was like whatever. It was like, I don't think it was a particularly scandalous outfit. And like, I had a teacher like pull me aside and be like, you look like a slut, go home and change. Like, it was like, there were some crazy things that happened in my high school. Like, I don't know if these happen all the time, but it's a crazy little fiefdom of like, of how people can talk to kids and like how everything interacts. That said, I had great teachers too. Like, I don't want to say that, but like, Jonathan, I love that story. I'm amazed that you got good feedback. That's actually one of the things I was going to say is like, I never got any good feedback on any essays throughout high school. And when I got to college, I had been like the whiz kid of like English and history. And when I got to college, I was like, from my public school, like, I was shocked that I was actually the whiz kid at science and math, and that like all of my writing was like terrible compared to like private school kids who, like, I don't know if you went to private school, but like a lot of private school kids at Brown that had literal PhDs teaching them English. And I was just kind of baffled.
Mine was a public school, made it even more remarkable. I think if she hadn't disliked me and if I hadn't been a jerk, I probably would not have had the special attention that I got, frankly.
It's pretty interesting. All right, Jonathan Rauch. What are you thinking about this week? We've had an incredible week. It's put a huge amount of material on the table to think about: protests, police brutality, the president's reaction, Bill Barr, who seems to think he's the interior minister of an authoritarian country, little green men around Washington. What's on your mind this week?
You told me I wouldn't have to prepare any thoughts. There's so many.
And you didn't.
So here's something that's on my mind.
Thoughts.
Here's something that's on my mind that's totally inappropriate, but I'm going to do it anyway.
That's what In Lieu of Fun is for.
So, Kate.
Yeah.
I have you on my screen now. You cannot run. You cannot hide. I have written 2 book chapters, which I may ask you to read because they're right up your alley. One is on why the social media are hostile to truth and how to fix it. And the second is on disinformation and how to deal with that. It's from my book.
I would completely read
I'm working on. It's called The Constitution of Knowledge. And it's about the epistemic crisis and how to cope with it, and Trump and trolls and Twitter and all sorts of stuff like that. So all of that stuff is on my mind. But if you're willing to potentially do that, if I work up the nerve to have an actual expert law professor who will do to my chapters what Mrs. Levin did to my 8th grade book reports, I would love to have your email and solicit your advice on my completely amateurish work.
But her middle name is Mrs. Levin.
It's actually
it's Mrs.
E.
Levin.
It's E. It's for editor. But that sounds great, Jonathan. I'd love to read them. And then also, I mean, I just kind of love to hear what you're thinking. I love that you call it. Oh my God, I love that you, in the first place, call it an epistemological crisis, because I know that sounds like duh, but when I keep telling people that this is like a philosophical issue that like is actually something that's been studied for like thousands and thousands of years, no one like I said, I made a tweet joke that was like, we're all epistemologists now. And I was like, I thought that was good. And no one, it got like 3 likes. I don't think people know what epistemology is. And I think the Venn diagram of people who know what epistemology is and understand my JFK reference, like, is like not, it's like,
it's you and me. It's the two of us.
Yes.
But it's growing, you know,
Jonathan.
people like Jim Comey and Michael Hayden and Hillary Clinton, lots of people now are discovering the epistemic crisis and thinking and writing about it. And Donald Trump is making sure of that. So the book I'm working on is based on an article that ran in National Affairs a 1.5 years ago. It was called The Constitution of Knowledge. The working idea is that we have a social system for deciding on the difference between truth and falsehood, facts and fiction, reality and illusion. It's a liberal system, very much in many ways like the political constitutional system, except it's not written down, it's more organic, but it's embodied in reality-based occupations like science and like journalism, also the intelligence community and the legal community, which are all supposed to be evidence-based and truth-based. So the first half of the book lays out the founding and the underlying principles of the Constitution of Knowledge, how it works to force compromise on epistemic issues, why it forces everyone to work on the same reality instead of splintering off into multiple separatist realities, and all of that. The second half, which is the part that I just inappropriately keyholed Kate to look at, is about...
There's nothing inappropriate about that. If we can't use in lieu of fun to workshop our work, why have it?
Well, good. I'm glad to hear that, because I have it on tape that she said if I asked her, she might be willing to look at my
like
chapters.
Beyond flattered you would ask me, and like, yeah, no, it's so great. That's great.
So the second half is about modern attacks on the Constitution of Knowledge. There are lots of pre-modern attacks, but the problem of sociopathy and sociopathic attacks on truth is ancient. In fact, Plato's Republic starts with it. The foundational problem of Plato's Republic is, what do you do about the sociopath who gets an invisibility device that allows him to break all the rules and get away with it? How do you tell him he shouldn't do that? Well, who are we talking about here? Donald Trump. Societies down through the ages have had to cope with that terrible problem, the problem of sociopaths. That's Hamilton in his famous letter to Washington about ambitious people who could destroy democracy if you let them do it. The whole political constitution is about blocking those people by requiring multiple veto points, multiple checkpoints. So is the knowledge system. It's about blocking the kind of stuff Trump has been doing. So the chapter on on social media talks about the original sin of social media, which is it was constructed as an advertising vehicle, meaning it's ostensibly neutral to truth, but in fact it's hostile to truth, because if you leave people to their own devices, they'll click on stuff that's outrageous and conspiratorial. And that's built in, but I claim it's fixable. That's where you come in, Kate. I have some ideas for that. I argue that what has to be built are institutions, and unlike some people, I'm pretty positive on Facebook's independent review board. I'm not sure it'll work, but I think it's the right way to think about the problem, which is institutional innovations to set up some guardrails, some buffers, some checks and balances. And then the chapter I'm thinking most about this week, because it's partly but not entirely about Trump, is disinformation. And you guys, you know, you've had shows about this. In fact, I've listened to your shows about it, as well as Arbiters of Truth, a fantastic podcast series on lawfare, just indispensable. But I've been learning about that, and I'm discovering disinformation, the fire hose of falsehood, is not new. It dates at least to the beginning of the 20th century. But what happened is modern technology made it much easier to do. Conservative media came along, was able to set up a kind of separate epistemic realm that amplified conspiracy theories, and that paves the way for Donald Trump, who, in my view, not alone, but in my view, is running a classic disinformation campaign of the sort that Russians ran against America for years, and at times America tried to run against Russia. These campaigns are aimed at finding and heightening the fractures and polarization in the target in the adversary society in order to disrupt it and make grifting or foreign policy goals or whatever your goals are more easy. And I realized, well, that's what Donald Trump is doing, except that his enemy society is American society. So what we have here is not just a fad by a sociopath, not just a guy who can't tell the truth. We have a surprisingly effective disinformation war that's being run against the American people by its president. So that's what I'm thinking about this week.
Ben, go ahead, but I have a thought, but
please go ahead.
So that's fascinating. Something I've been thinking about is how we tell history when we look back on it and how we kind of coalesce ideas and the historiography of everything. And one of those things is like that there has been, that this was like some type of movement that Donald Trump perpetrated and like had a plan to entrench himself. And not that he actually, and I do think that this is maybe forgotten. I think he's an egoist and a narcissist and a psychopath in like a bunch of different ways. But I also do think that he and like that was his run for president. But I do think he accidentally, to a certain extent, found himself elected to president. And I still believe that. I still think that like he was kind of like, I just will never forget the images of him after the election that were kind of like, I don't know, he was kind of like the dog that caught the car. Like, I just felt like he had no idea like what the fuck he was doing or like anything about like what to like, you know, to think or do. People had not yet at that point, I don't think, solidified or even defined his like 38% base as like such the base. Like that was like the line that the poll numbers wouldn't drop below. Does that matter, Jonathan? Does any of that matter? Or do you think that that is like, do you think that this is kind of, I don't know, that it doesn't matter that he doesn't realize that he's doing this, or it wasn't like that he didn't have like the appropriate mens rea, so to speak. The fact is he's here, he's doing it. This is what he's created. And so who cares?
Well, that's a hard question. So does it matter if he's intentional or just kind of blundering along? I'm not sure how much it matters. I believe that he is a self-aware student of disinformation. Back in 2004, he said he was in an interview where he admired disinformation techniques that were being used against John Kerry. We know that when he was, I think it was 2012, when someone said he was the greatest troll on the internet, he said, "Thank you, that's a great compliment." So I believe, at least in the information warfare aspect of what he's doing, he knows what he's doing and he's very good at it. Now, it could be he's just a crazy sociopath who has blundered into sophisticated use of fire hose of falsehood disinformation tactics. Be that as it may, if you were Vladimir Putin and wanted to run a campaign of disinformation against the American public from the US presidency, you would do the same thing. So how much does the intentionality matter? I'm not sure, and I'm not sure it really makes a difference. I think what does make a difference is that we now have a demonstrated precedence for a president and his White House apparatus running a disinformation campaign from the White House against the American public, and to an extent making it work. So those are some of the stakes in the election this year. To the extent he gets away with it, to the extent it works, I expect others will do the same, right?
Oh, completely.
Yeah, I definitely think whether he has done it intentionally or whether he has stumbled into it and it works for him, the flood of active false information propagated from the president and then expanded upon and amplified by an allied set of networks and media organizations is a model that others will follow. It works too well not to use. Pauline Brock, who wrote me and said she is one of the 2.9% who voted for Jonathan Rauch in the poll and wants to know what she won, and I said she wins the right to the first question. So here you go, Pauline. Your prize for being one of the few, the proud, the Rauch voters.
I'm very proud of this. I was so shocked when I saw the choice, like the count was so low for my choice that I was really hoping it would be right.
Well, vindicated, like Kate's paper.
Yes, I'm very proud of myself. What I was wondering, I mean, it's not. It's obvious that Donald Trump is not the first person to have his personality. And then, as you were saying, Plato wrote about it and Alexander Hamilton, and this is nothing new. Then why did he take everybody by surprise like he did? Why was, I mean, the United States not more prepared for something like him?
Super question. And one that I've been puzzling over for a long time. Jonathan, what do you think the contours of the answer to that question look like?
I'd love to get your take. There's a good book about this by a fellow named Thomas Rid, who your Lawfare staff interviewed. It's a history of disinformation. It's extremely good. And basically, he argues that for a while, America was in the disinformation business and was actually pretty darn good at it. But this is not a sustainable model for American society. That things like the Church Commission and the abuses of the FBI and the CIA came to light. And American intelligence got out of the disinformation business. And we also had developments in politics that tended to penalize lying over time. We had the example of Nixon. Then we had Carter, I will never lie to you. So in a good way, in a positive way, we unilaterally disarmed in the world of disinformation. It just kind of ceased being on our radar. So it wasn't just that Trump took us by surprise, Putin took us by surprise, anti-vaxxers took us by surprise. They were pioneers in this space long before anyone realized what was going on. Breitbart, Milo Yiannopoulos, Gamergate, the rise of troll epistemology, where you have coordinated swarms amplifying conspiracy theories and attacking people. All of this seemed to come out of nowhere because we weren't in any of those business. We all thought, I thought, oh, social media is going to be great because it's going to connect us all, and then we'll have a marketplace of ideas, and the best ideas will rise to the top. What we forgot in all those years, the only reason the marketplace of ideas works is because it worked through a series of highly structured institutions like science and journalism and newsrooms and editors and fact checkers and peer review and journals and publications and red teams and intelligence and bar associations and law schools and journalistic ethics and on and on. So Thomas Rid argues that we had a period of about maybe 2000 to 2016 that was a golden age for disinformation because it just wasn't occurring to anyone that it could happen. Fortunately, the golden age of disinformation is over. We're now well aware of it. Newspapers have reporters covering it. Lawfare has an entire beat that's looking at it. So the surprise factor is gone. The real shock will be if we're surprised again in 2020.
So I am very surprised by your answer to that, Jonathan, because you didn't mention the first thing that I would have mentioned in answer to that question entirely based on your work, which is the role of political parties. And that in the more traditional political environment that has prevailed up until relatively recently, the major system that we used to prevent the rise of political sociopaths was the political party system, not the constitutional system per se. It was this sort of extra constitutional graft from the early 19th century, late 18th century, where we kind of said, okay, the function that the founders entrusted to the Electoral College, which was imagined to be keeping the populace from doing something really stupid. The Electoral College isn't the entity that's going to play that role. The political party is, and the public can do what it wants. It can talk to, can have all kinds of crazy people run and get a certain amount of momentum. But at the end of the day, the political party system will hone those instincts and choose reasonable people to be the exemplars of the two great political movements. And so, yeah, you can have a George Wallace, but he won't get through the primaries. And you can have a Pat Buchanan, but he won't get through the primaries. And you can have a Jesse Jackson, who is, not a crazy person, but he won't get through the primaries either. And so that process of political homogenization, which a lot of people decry, but which a great scholar named Jonathan Rauch celebrates, and I think rightly, is, I think, the principle that we did not fully anticipate the degree to which the breakdown of the of the two great political parties, or at least one of them, because this is not a symmetrical effect. The Democratic Party has held together relatively well, actually, but the Republican Party has not, and it was not able to do what it had done in every prior election, which is to say to the Alan Keyses of the world, or the
Michelle Bachmann.
Bachmans, right? That's very nice.
Or the Andrew Yangs, for that matter.
Or the Andrew Yangs, that's very nice. Now it's the part where you shut up and go on Fox News. And
that's not that. I mean, sorry. There've always been, like, I grew up, and I will never forget telling my parents to vote for Ross Perot. Like, I was like, go and vote for Ross Perot. Like, was this different? You didn't mention him, but like, I'm curious, like, where independents that fit into this mix.
So independents are an interesting fit in this mix, right? So in my lifetime, we've had major independent runs by John Anderson, by Ross Perot, by Ross Perot a second time, and then
George Wallace.
And the sum total of their electoral votes is really, really small, like almost none. And so, I do think the fundamental innovation of Donald Trump, alongside everything that Jonathan just described, is that he actually captured an entire political, one of the two main political parties, and he's, to this day, has it by the throat. And I think that's something that we have never seen before in a complete way. And I think my fundamental answer to Pauline's question is, it is the capture of the Republican Party by Donald Trump that is what caught us by surprise. And I wouldn't have predicted it in 100 years.
Yes to all of that. The reason I didn't mention it is I understood Pauline's question a little more narrowly, to just focusing specifically on the disinformation aspect. But all of that is true. And a friendly amendment for Kate is, third party and independent runs are historically very important, not because they win, but because of the influence that they have on the major parties. And a good example of that is Bernie Sanders, who, although he ran as a Democrat, was in fact not really a Democrat, didn't even really pretend to be a Democrat.
I mean, I remember liking him very much as like an independent, like not liking him, but like just kind of respecting the fact. Sorry, go ahead.
And he has done what he set out to do to a large extent, which is move the agenda significantly to the left of where it was only 4 years ago, when Hillary Clinton, arguably a more liberal candidate than Joe Biden, was running. So they can have influence, but the key is what Ben said, that parties have always played the role of vetting to weed out sociopaths. They look for candidates who can do two things. First, win the election, but then unite the party and govern afterwards. And when they can't play that role, no one else reliably does.
It's such an interesting point because like I really have like long wanted some type of medium, like middle of the road party between Democrats and Republicans. And I think a lot of people have felt that way over the last 12 years, 15 or 16 years. And that like, it's really interesting to me that all of a sudden we're kind of coming to this age and the first third party is going to be maybe this crazy Trumpist party. I mean, I guess we kind of saw it with the rise of the Tea Party. That is like some of like, you know, Michelle Bachmann, as you said before, like kind of the people that have like instigated this. But yeah, I really wonder like what, I mean, looking back at my American history, I really wonder like how much is baked into the idea of a two-party system, even though it was never supposed to be necessarily a two-party system.
So I think a huge amount of it. So Pauline, I don't think I'm speaking out of school to say Pauline is Canadian. And, you know, in Canada, it is possible and has happened for one party or another to simply wipe out, right? The old progressive conservative party, when after Brian Mulroney's term, I think it had 0 members of parliament, right? It was just a total wipeout, and the Liberals had a period of, you know, ascendancy. That doesn't happen in the United States, right? And so the two parties are extremely broad coalitions, and they're very durable. And so we've had the same, broadly speaking, the same two parties since 1856. And they shift around in terms of what the coalitions they represent, but the architectures of those parties are really static. And that means that when, you know, an anti-democratic movement, and we should be candid about what the Trump movement is, it's a profoundly anti-democratic movement, seizes control over one of the parties, that's a really big problem, because in a two-party system, both parties do win at some point. And so I do think one of the goals of the next few years that interacts in a really interesting way with Jonathan's project is, how do you rehabilitate the Republican Party? And you have to, because eventually it's going to win again.
So Ben, since we're on this, and I was going to ask you anyway, Kate too, of course, one of the things I've been thinking about this week is this kind of de facto debate that's taking shape between Anne Applebaum and George Will on the one hand and Jonathan Last, and maybe me on the other hand. I don't know if you've looked at this at all, but the question is— I have
followed it closely.
Yeah, so the question—
I followed it too.
—is for ILOF viewers is, suppose Trump loses, suppose he even loses bigly, which I now think is more likely than not. George Will and Anne Applebaum basically say, Republicans will drop Trump and Trumpism like a hot potato, and it'll be, who was Donald Trump anyway? And they'll quickly morph to the next thing. And if you look at the long history of the Republican Party, you know, it starts out with Lincoln, and then it becomes 9 totally different things. And it become 9, again, more totally different things. So that's one view. The other view, Jonathan Last, and I think I'm in this camp, but I'm not sure, is no, it's different because the Trump forces have captured the party. They've got infrastructure, they've tasted power. The way I put it is that we shouldn't think of Trump as the Trump movement. We should think of it as the George Wallace movement, which is a very significant, large block of Americans who've been around for 50 years and aren't going anywhere, and now have not a majority within the Republican Party, but certainly at a minimum veto power within it. So that means you don't need to have Trump for Trumpism to basically be at least a vetoing force in the Republican Party, a force that you're really worried about if you're a Republican primary candidate. So do either of you have a view on this?
I do, but it's a view that rejects the dichotomy. First of all, you know, I think I have a kind of I have a hang on, you're both right kind of view of it. So the sense in which I agree with Anne and George is one of the elements of the current problem is the cult of personality around Trump, which is a genuine cult of personality. And, it is to the point that the great leader can be said to do no wrong, right? He can be, we have to contort ourselves into pretzels to pretend that that when he, that stupid, idiotic things that he said were actually important and wise, right? And that, I think, that aspect of it, I don't see how it survives him, because the once that bubble bursts, I do agree with Anne that people will run away from it really fast and pretend that they were, that they were never bowing at the feet of the leader. The sense in which I agree with you guys is that I thought your piece about George Wallace, which for those who haven't read it, is a really eye-opening and important contribution. I think that for like this strain, the sense in which Trumpism is an ideological strain that represents certain things. I distaste for immigration, white anger, a demand for law and order, meaning law and order in a very racialized context, a yearning for the protection of the white little guy, those things. That is a very old ideological strain. It may go back further than aspects of it are certainly, you can find them in Huey Long and others. Andrew Jackson. And that, I think, will certainly outlive the Trump era, and to the extent that it has become a major feature of the Republican Party, or one might say the dominant feature of the Republican Party, that is turning that party into the party of white resentments. I entirely agree with you guys that that is a problem that is going to significantly outlive Trump. What do you think, Kate?
I mean, I'm kind of reminded of the way, and this is coming from someone who I was registered Republican for the first 15 years of my being able to register life. Someone described to me once that that the GOP was the party of bankers and bullies, right? I'm sure everyone's heard that before. But I think that I thought that was a stupid dichotomy and not really great. But now kind of looking at how we're talking about this, I do feel as if there's two things happening. And it really depends on whether you are trying to be part of like an elite or you are an elite, and like whether you are like part of the people. And what's really strange, and what people like, I feel like, and I hope you talk about this, Jonathan, I'm sure you do, is like about Trump, is that even though he was supposedly of this elite, and obviously he instead was like this complete asshat that just appealed to like these people swilling like beer and like sitting on their porch shooting ducks. And like, there was nothing wrong with that, but he like, why a millionaire that like had an entire real estate fortune like handed to him appealed to those people was fascinating to me and remains fascinating to me. I think I mentioned yesterday that basically that my next door neighbor, who has voted for Trump many times and who I'm very, very close to, were like making bullets on their front porch yesterday and like simultaneously kind of talking about the fact that maybe Trump has like overextended his hand this time. This is the only time I've ever heard them say that they thought that they agreed with they thought that the George Floyd thing was like absolutely terrible. So there's just been this like, I don't know. I just kind of think that there is this like, it's the bullies. And why does Trump appeal to them? I think that there is a still like this, and this is coming from honestly people in my family and other people that I've talked to that all have voted for Trump, say that, I don't know, like he's this American dream, even though he's not. He is this American dream that isn't snooty and isn't like elite. And so they feel like they can, have a conversation with him, but also dream about becoming billionaires, and that he is like that epitome of something. And I know I'm not saying anything new, but I'm just saying that has become more and more entrenched in the last kind of 4 years. And that it kind of shocks me that when you have people on like Ann Applebaum is right, people are going to leave him. People that are elites and want to have appeal to other elites, conservative or not, Republican or not, but like Yale Law School grads, whatever. The only thing that's going to keep them harnessed to Trump is the belief that they'll get that 38% and they can hold on to it and have that for their own, right? In some way. But it's not clear that they can do that because he's such a unique personality. And I think he hits something that's so unique. So I don't know. Does any of that make sense? I just like, I don't think it's almost like, it's like not like a Trump party. It is like, Trump embodies in this weird way, like this American dream / everyday manism while being like a bajillionaire that like, and this speaking his mind. And like, that's why he can't do any wrong, because that's the thing that people are holding on to when they like see him. I feel like, well, at least that's like the people that I talk to that vote for him. That's how they like, they describe it. I talked a lot with my hands there. Sorry, guys.
Do you want reactions, or do you want to go to Big Blue Blogger?
If you
I can offer a quick
reactions,
reaction.
Yeah, give a reaction.
Well, I do, which is that here's something to at least think about. I don't say this in a spirit of pessimism or fatalism, but it's something to think about. Wallace voters and Trump voters are demographically very similar. And they're responding to a very similar phenomenon and message, which is not new, which is this sense of being culturally marginalized and left behind and replaced by other groups. That is not a new thing in America. It was going on in the 60s. Trump embodies resistance to that. They admire the qualities we dislike, many of these supporters, such as the nihilism, the radicalism, the anti-system qualities, because they don't feel they have a stake in the direction the country's going. And as we now see in the Floyd protests, despite Trump's political ascendancy, his team is still losing the culture war, the fight for the culture. Anti-racism is moving ahead. I include myself in those who over the last 2 years, but especially the last 2 weeks, have moved significantly in the direction of anti-racism and its implications. So if Trump loses this election,
not to be clear that you were pro-racism before, Jonathan.
Yeah,
no,
correct.
Yes.
Let's say that for the record. That's important. But I was more inclined to be the sort of person who said, well, look, my relatives weren't even here and I'm not a racist. So would you cut it out already? I'm much less inclined to say that than I was even 2 weeks ago, and certainly than 2 years ago. And that's true of a lot of people in corporate America. We're seeing it. Wonderful post by David French today, who's a conservative, making this point. So Trump
was
loses,
on in lieu of fun 2 days ago.
And yeah, I can't wait to play it. So Trump loses the politics, and now they're losing in the culture after 4 years of Trump. They get even more angry and nihilistic, right?
I think that's right. So the Big Blue Blogger has a question that represents several questions in the thread. I had to choose one person to pose it, and because I love saying Big Blue Blogger, I chose Michael. The floor is yours, sir.
Thank you, Ben. First, a quick comment on Trump. I wouldn't underestimate the value of the license that he gives to people's worst impulses and how much that's appreciated by his supporters. But my question is for Jonathan, and really it involves looking forward to the next stage of your project. You're going to be due in a few years for another update to demosclerosis and government's end, maybe 2023. Do you expect that when that time comes that your prevailing tone will be hope or despair?
And just to be clear, there are at least a couple other people who asked in different words more or less the same question, specifically with
I
reference
also have
to-
that question.
with reference to demosclerosis. So, Jonathan, are we going to be optimistic next time?
That's a question because there have been so many crises and political heart attacks, and because demosclerosis is a chronic condition. It's a gradual diminution of government's ability to solve problems over time. The honest, unsatisfying answer is I haven't thought about it that much lately. I think it has clearly become even harder than it was when I wrote that book. The most recent edition was published 20 years ago. It's become even harder for the government to respond to problems. On the other hand, if there are bright spots in the coronavirus response, and one of them was the extraordinary response from Congress. If you had told me that you would get near unanimity in both parties for 3 bailout packages on this order of magnitude, I would have said you were nuts. But push came to shove, it happened. So I guess I don't really know, Michael Big Blue Blogger. Why can't you spell, by the way? Don't you know how to spell blue?
No, wait, he does. It's like properly spelled.
No, sometimes it's blah.
Oh, that's true. That is true. That is sometimes it's like blue, but yes.
And I've razzed him about this several times, including by pronouncing his handle phonetically. But then he started including the E for a while, so I dropped it. I'm glad you picked up that particular torch.
Well, notice how I ducked the question because I don't really know. I don't really know. There's just too much going on and too much in the air. I do know that I'm really, really happy that several people are actually interested in that question. I'm going to guess they're all people. There were actually people who were assigned demosclerosis in high school or college.
Anonymous attendee points out that bleu is Italian for blue. Is that true? I'm not sure.
And blogger is Italian for blogger.
Exactly.
Big is not Italian.
Big,
no,
big is Italian for big. I think
but Jonathan, I'm really interested.
Merit.
What is your like? Okay, so we asked you like positive or negative, but like, okay, so that's fair. Everything is up in the air, but everything is up in the air for everyone. I think that like it's actually kind of traumatic and very hard for a lot of people to be having their lives be so up in the air. As a society, we're all in the same place. No one can plan anything more than a few weeks in advance. How do you think that impacts not just politics, but like, how does it impact like your daily life? Like, are you making plans? Are you doing things?
I'm not making travel plans or speaking plans. Everything's up in the air in my life, and it's weird and disconcerting. I'm starting to socialize with live human beings again in small groups of people who I'm confident have been careful. So I'm starting to do that, but I don't know anything anymore. And
can I ask a question? After like a couple of weeks of pretty much not interacting with like live humans, is it weird to go back, or is it just lovely?
No, it's just like drinking water after not drinking water for a long time. It feels like very normal.
And will you continue doing that if the numbers spike again, or will you go back into a deeper self-imposed lockdown?
Well, I'll continue doing careful socializing with people that I'm confident have been conscientious. This was not true in the first month where we didn't know who'd been exposed and where people had been. But I think now we have a pretty good sense of who's been exposed and who hasn't. I would not socialize with someone who spent the last week in protests. Nothing personal, but I wouldn't do that. But I would socialize with, Ben and Tammy, because I'm pretty sure you have not exposed yourself to the virus.
I want to ask an important podcast question. Have you listened to the Talking Politics History of Ideas special podcast series? And if so, what do you think of it?
I have not. I hadn't even heard of it. Send me a link. Talking Politics.
So Talking Politics is a remarkable British podcast run by a Cambridge professor named David Runciman and Helen Thompson, who I think the latter of whom, well, they're both extremely brilliant, but I think Helen Thompson is just one of the smartest people I listen to in podcasts. And David, during lockdown, has done this remarkable series of 12 lectures about the history of ideas called Talking Politics, History of Ideas. And I ask you about it because the first one is a wonderfully eccentric lecture about Hobbes, whom I know to be a hero of yours.
Oh, that guy. Wait, is that the guy from the cartoon?
It is the guy from the cartoon.
It's always so good to have millennials in these conversations.
Exactly. And I think it is one of the most creative and interesting use of the podcast form. Interesting in its spareness. It's just David talking about books and ideas that he's come across, that have had big impacts. And it's opinionated, it's extremely well argued, it's informative, and it's just thoughtful throughout. And I'm kind of in awe of it. And I've thought it would be fun. I haven't talked to David about it, but to have him come on and do like 12 episodes of In Lieu of Fun, taking questions about like these different big ideas that he talks about. It's probably would be too distracting to spend 12 episodes on it, but I think it's just a remarkable project that he's done.
I will check it out. It raises another podcast question. When you say 12 episodes, that implies a plenitude of future episodes. Is In Lieu of Fun going to outlive the current lockdown?
In Lieu of Fun will end, at least for me, it will have to end the day I go back to work at Brookings. But I think as long as I am socially isolated, having a drink with Kate every afternoon at 5 is one of the things I look forward to. And I intend, as long as the current degree of social isolation continues, to do it every day, rain or shine, 7 days a week.
Yeah, Ben is the limiting factor here. Because I'm on pre-tenure leave. I don't even know if I've told you this. I'm on pre-tenure leave for the fall. So I think not only am I like not teaching this summer, obviously, and not traveling anywhere, obviously, I'm on pre-tenure leave for the fall. My partner's job is like basically like his entire team is based in Seattle. And so like, it's like there's no way he's like, and so he was previously based in New York, but his new team is based in Seattle, and so it's just like there's no point in him ever going back to work. So we're in Cape Cod for Jonathan. You can come visit us. We're in Wellfleet. We're not far from Provincetown. It's the best. This is also, by the way, I have like such a soft spot in my heart for Provincetown. Like this is like my early exposure. Like it's just like you like. Have you been there, Jonathan?
Oh yeah, I'm gay.
I know, but like a lot of gay people haven't been. It's not like you could have gone to Fire Island is the same thing.
I have been to Provincetown. I have not, in fact, been to Fire Island.
Yeah,
I've been to
it
Fire
was just,
I love the Cape.
Yeah, it's just like I will never forget being like, like Mrs. Houlihan being in 8th grade and watching people, like 2 women be holding hands walking down the street and like being like, oh, that's nice. Like I hold hands with like my friend Rachel. Like when we walked down the street, I was like 12, and my parents were like, like not the same. It's changed a lot, but it's also still just amazing community. So,
well, I think the short answer, Jonathan, is we have no plans to end it because circumstances are not yet sufficiently changed that would cause it to end. We have not missed a day in, 72 days, Kate?
Yeah, like an absurdly long time.
And I think we're certainly likely to hit 100 days before it ends, but at some point it will end, and it will be a kind of like video diary of the lockdown, I suppose.
We'll I thought about shaving my head. Did you see this poll that I did? There was like 1,500 people weighed in on whether I should shave my head or not, and it was literally 49-51 shaving my head versus not shaving my head.
So do you feel bound by the outcome?
No, of course not. That 49-51% outcome, that's fucking Bush v. Gore. I don't want that shit. Like, I'm not going to make my hair do something because of that. Anyway, I want I want a clear majority, but I decided that it would be fun to just keep growing my hair and have it be awful every day in lieu of fun until it gets long enough to not be awful.
There's even the special cowlick episode.
Oh God, that episode is terrible.
So, Kate, what do we have on tap for this week? We have quite a week coming up on In Lieu of Fun.
We have Matt Iglesias tomorrow, then Larry Lessig. At some point, we have Liz Garbus and Matt Miller. And
so I think Liz Garbus can't do this week, but Matt Miller is Wednesday.
Oh, great!
And then I think.
And then
Catherine
we're looking at Julian Sanchez and Kathleen Ballou from the University of Chicago.
Yeah, and Catherine Rampell will probably I'll talk to her about Thursday or Friday. So, and then we'll one of and I do jokes aside want to get Bill Crystal at some point. So
sorry.
Why is that funny?
I just it's just like funny to me. I'm like, yeah, you could just like get Bill Crystal. I mean, but this is I should also be used to this buds. At this point.
We're buds.
Bill might do it. He's been doing podcasts. Just when you get Catherine, 2 things to say, and then I'll let you wrap. But when you get Catherine, I'd love to hear you ask her take on the brouhaha at the New York Times.
Oh my God! Yes.
Editorial.
Why don't you come on and be part of the interview for Catherine?
I'd love to. I'm, as a journalist, a working journalist, and someone who's written books on political correctness and the like. I'm super interested in not feeling very good about all of that. And the second thing is just to let you know, when you're desperate, when you absolutely can't get anyone good on the show, there's always me.
Jonathan Rauch, weren't you the one that like laughed in Ben's face when he talked about the conceit of this idea?
No, I'm the whole reason for this idea. It's happened because of me.
That is true. It has happened because of you, despite your skepticism. But I will say, Jonathan, that I have, and we can go into this later, but I have deeply mixed feelings about the removal of James Bennett today, because on the one hand, all of the feelings behind your saying you're not feeling so good about it, I share, but I am also reminded that James Bennett is the only person in the world who has ever fired me. And he fired me as a columnist for the Atlantic. And I just want to say, so die all who fire me.
Is that your Mrs. Houlihan?
Eventually, there is justice, and it is today. So that's
it is his Mrs. Houlihan.
That's the mature side of my reaction. Yes, James.
This,
Mrs.
by the way,
Houlihan.
just so you know, this is the reason I thought you could not carry off this podcast.
Jonathan
You just
Rauch.
went and did it.
Yep, I raspberried James Bennett on his firing, and I'm hashtag sorry not sorry, because he did fire me once, and then 3 years later wrote me a letter saying he was removing me as a contributing editor from the Atlantic's masthead because I hadn't contributed anything recently.
Then he hired you back. Well,
no,
Atlantic
he
hired
did
you
not.
back.
Jeffrey
Atlantic
Goldberg did, and burst out laughing when I told him that I'd been fired from the Atlantic. So I just want to say there is, in small ways, the arc of history is long, but it bends towards justice. Thank you, Jonathan, for joining us. Kate, until 22 hours and 54 minutes from now, what do we say?
In lieu of fun, if you can't have fun with us, buy all of Jonathan Rauch's books.
Yes, you should. That is exactly what we say.